Hi, and welcome to Spaminar, the Society of Props Managers webinar series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Ursula Bowden. I'm a SPAM member, and I'm the props coordinator for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Department of Theater and Dance. The Society of Prop Managers, known as SPM, was formed in 1994 by a small group of prop professionals in the Midwest to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production departments. Today, we are an association of 150 plus professional prop managers and educators from not-for-profit producing organizations, opera companies, and educational institutions. We've built an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. As with previous Spaminars, we're requesting pay-what-you-can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, links to donate will be in the chat. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled the live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button on the bottom and then select Show Subtitle. Alternatively, you can click View Full Transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. I'm joined tonight by SPM members Jay Lasnik, who is the Props Department Supervisor and Props Skills Instructor at Penn State School of Theater, and Kevin Williams, who is the Prop Shop Supervisor at UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television, to talk about She Kills Monsters. We'll be talking with them about the challenges and successes in building this show, including their processes, what they learned, and more. Please feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat, and Kevin and Jay will field them as we go. Over to you, Kevin and Jay.
Good evening, everyone. Jay, we'll just dive right in. What do you think?
All right, let's do it.
All right. And here we are. So, again, just recapping, we want you guys to feel free to speak up, let our hosts know if you guys have questions in the moment. Be really great, and we'd love to field those for you as we go along. So without further ado, Jay, why don't you go ahead and give us a little overview about your team?
Yeah, thank you. Before we get into the pictures and all that, all the subject matter, we wanted to acknowledge a few people, and these will be updated with more information later for the YouTube version. But for Penn State, the show was directed by Sebastian Trainer and Eric Johnson. The set was designed by Ryan Douglas, and the puppets were designed by Bekah Achuff. Ryan was a MFA, third-year MFA student. Bekah was a graduating fourth-year undergraduate, and Sebastian and Eric were faculty.
Yeah, we had the great pleasure of Bruce Lemon Jr. Joining us as director for that show. He was an outside director hired for the project. Just wonderful guy. And then we had a graduate student, Yilin Zhao, as both our scenic and puppet designer. Yilin had actually done her undergrad with us at UCLA and had gone away for a year and then decided, nope, I want to come back to UCLA. And when she came back, this was her first project, and it was just a joy to work on it with her. As she's one of the most creative students that I've seen come through our program.
So next up, I wanted to share one of my preliminary lists, what that looks like. I know I'm interested in how other people organize their shows, so I thought it would be interesting to share how I organized this show. This is the preliminary. Obviously, there were several more iterations after. Obviously, I've got the categories on the left and page references, what the prop is and what character it's for, and columns of to help me remember, is the prop in rehearsal, and is the rehearsal prop the show prop, or is the rehearsal prop just the rehearsal prop, and is there a different prop for the show prop? That's what the different colors are for. In the details, I always list the questions that I want to ask before my first or second meeting with the director and designer. If I don't highlight them, I spend time searching for them, which I think is kind of rude in the meeting. So I highlight them in green, and then as I get answers, I take that away and put the answers there. Uh, and then the traditional pull build by columns and budgets for money and time and labor hours. And that labor hour column leads me to talk about, and Kevin, you can share what your school does, but we wanted to frame our presentation with the reality so that people knew who built all this stuff and how much time they spend. So at the Penn State prop shop, I have two scenic design graduate students who work in the shop 20 hours a week, approximately, give or take. And then I've got anywhere between 4 and 6 undergraduate students who are in the shop. We say 6 to 8 hours a week. There's a number for the semester. If you're an artisan, you're in there 6 to 8 hours or more. If you want to come, that's great. But the program only requires you to do that amount. If you are an assistant prop supervisor, a production prop supervisor for a show, or supervising a show, then it's the 8 hours and as much as it takes. Um, Kevin, what's your makeup like there?
Yeah, over at UCLA, we are more of an art-driven school as opposed to a production-driven school. Yet we try to offer as many opportunities for the undergraduate students to take part in the actual physical production process. My particular class or lab is one of the more advanced ones that requires a few prerequisites before you can enroll. And we're on the quarter system, so each quarter I have anywhere from 18 to 20 students over 3 different classes every week. And these students come from a diverse background, and sometimes they've got some experience in fabrication or fine art. But more often than not, I think a lot of them are starting at a very foundational level where they're learning as we go. So in that, they actually are tasked with a lot more complicated processes. And for a show like She Kills Monsters, this is one of the more advanced pieces that we did. But I will say, yeah, it's interesting to see how they take that on.
Question then for you. Were you the prop supervisor for your show?
Yes, at UCLA, we don't often have the ability to offer those sorts of opportunities. Now, I will give the students the opportunity to kind of take more of an active role as much as they want to, but it's not something that's like an academic assignment as it
Right.
is. So I oversee the operations for all of the shows that we put on stage.
Awesome. Um, for our production, we had a props supervisor. I think she was a third or fourth year undergraduate. And then then we had Bekah, the props designer and principal artisan, and Ryan, the set designer. And then I supervised and mentored all of them in the prop and puppet shop. So it was great. At Tech Week, there were 3 people at the table, 3 students at the table, and me. And you know, I just kind of let them do their thing, and it was wonderful to see. And I had a great experience, not being in charge, but not really being in charge. Um, so
So
anyway,
Jay,
yeah,
with that, I have a question for you now. So with that, the assignment of these students to this, what's the function like in the shop space? And actually, we can move on to the next slide, perhaps, and you can
sure,
tell us a little bit about your work environment.
sure, great. Well, physically, everyone, we're very fortunate at Penn State, and I tell the students that all the time. We actually have a very, very large space as far as I am concerned. The main room here, the one you see on the picture, this is our main room. It's approximately 25 by 22 feet. And around the corner this way, there's a sink and the paints and everything. And the next slide shows there's 2 rooms, well, one big room to the left. And when I got there 8 years ago, believe it or not, this whole space was full of shelves. And the shelves were full of props that no one will ever use again. So, over the first couple months and short years, we cleaned that out, culled a bunch of the stuff, and I made it into working space and storage. Um, Kevin, to get back to your question, was it more about how, like the ladder of job assignments, you were kind of asking?
Yeah, I guess the more specific would be how much agency do they have in these shop
Oh,
environments, or is it
sure.
over, is it with direct supervision,
Sure.
especially with the complicated shows such as She Kills Monsters?
Great question. So the way it's organized with me is your first semester, you're always an artisan. That's get to know you, find things in the shop and whatever, uh, kind of so that they get the lay of the land. If a student comes in and they say, I want to, I want to do I know my, major's scenic design or my emphasis is scenic design, but I want to do props, then they're in the prop shop for at least 3 of their 4 years, maybe all four, but I like it when, they go back and forth or 3 and 1 or 2 and 2. If someone volunteers, I basically give them what they want. Um, and I prepare them for that. So first semester, first year, you're an artisan. Second semester, second year-ish, you would be assisting me on a show. And as assistant, I carbon copy them on all the emails. They attend most of the production meetings. Last week and this week, my assistant needs to stay in the shop and finish How to Succeed. And during Tech Week, I basically make them the liaison to the stage. So when the stage manager, waves, hey, props, come on down, I send them down, and I'm within 10 or 20 feet or whatnot. But I just think the more boots on the ground, hands-on experience they get communicating with the props ASM about how this works or why did it break or whatnot. Uh, that's that's really good. And I
Right.
was very fortunate this year to have two undergrad students volunteer on their own, one to prop supervise Love's Labor's Lost, a new musical adaptation set in contemporary times, and then a new adaptation of Alice in Wonderland.
Hmm.
So I'm heading up How to Succeed, and then the next two shows are theirs. They know very well, you get to take all the success, all the credit, and I will try not to, I won't set you up to fail. I will support you. But if something goes wrong or something goes off the rails, what's my motto? Think ahead, think ahead. So
Right.
you're gonna have to think ahead. We'll talk it out. We meet every week. We meet once a week, just them and me, and it can be uh, whatever they really want to talk about, have communication
Sure.
skills, a practical hand skill. We go over the budgets and stuff like that. But I think I set them up pretty strongly for success.
That's great. That's great. So when you're dealing with a show like this, I know I can speak about my experience at UCLA because I have an embarrassment of wealth in that we have a basement underneath our theater complex, which is about 6,000 square feet, and I have that all outfitted with my larger props. But my fabrication, audio, and small storage is all one long, narrow shared space. So I know that when we were working on a larger show such as She Kills Monsters, space became a premium, especially because these aren't projects that can be done in a day. They usually take quite a lot of time. So can was it similar with you? Was your work and your storage space a hybrid, or is it
Yeah.
two separate areas?
So the slide that we're looking at now, the room to the left, I call it. Uh, so our Tiamat, and everybody will see those in a couple minutes when we get to it. Our five-headed dragon was 5 heads, and
Hmm.
each head was from an 8 foot piece of Luan, and then it had 8 foot horns on it. So these were
Wow.
16-foot pieces, and we had, well, 22 feet here, give or take, but it's less because of the shelves on either side. So we had 5 pieces of wood in there on easels or sawhorses, and all the horns. And then when we took them to the theater, we attached the horns and then lifted them up. So yeah, it's
So,
storage and working space. We have a
yeah,
warehouse somewhere else too, but
interesting. So 16 feet. It's funny. I know when you and I were preparing for this seminar, I had no idea that they were that large. And it begs the question, which is something that we encounter day in and day out, is it a piece of scenery? Is it a prop? And at what point does the scale tip over and turn into it being a piece of scenery? So how did you guys end up building those? How did that
uh,
end up being on your plate?
so yeah, we're going through that right now with some other shows. I have to admit that s sometimes I get too excited myself about the fun of a build project.
Right.
I know that's a weakness of mine as a manager, as an office person. Um, but so sometimes we'll claim things. Obviously, if you volunteer, people will let you do it.
Of
So,
course, of course.
um, and Bekah had designed them, and she was in the prop shop, and so we just, I don't know, I don't think we really even thought about it. Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, but I
It's
think
yeah,
that's
it's
a problem of mine. I'll say, well,
well,
be
yeah.
fun to do.
But
It'll be fun to
it,
do.
yeah, topic for another seminar, I would say, but it's always that age-old question is it a prop, is it a piece of scenery, is it a costume? And with She Kills Monsters, kind of circling back to that, there was a lot of those gray areas of crossover, whether or not it was something that was worn on the body, and then was it then defined as a puppet element, or was it defined as a costume element? So, and I think that's probably a good segue for us to
Yeah.
get to what you were all here for. So, obviously, there's a lot of different iterations of this show that can be done. In the past, I've seen people do all of the monsters and creatures with nothing more than projections. Um, some people go very literal and dive into the Dungeons and Dragons mythology and pull directly from the red or the blue book and images and renderings that they've seen in there. And then other people go really far and just get very creative with it. And I know I can speak, at least for our designer, Yilin. She went more into her childhood and the cartoons and the fantasy books and elements that she was familiar and comfortable with, and pulled on those as resources for her design. So we're going to start with the gelatinous cube. So, Jay, you want to tell us a little bit
Sure.
about what inspired this design?
Uh, I think for Bekah and Sebastian and whatnot, the I think the description of the
Right.
traditional cube really inspired it. We, we wanted it to be three-dimensional. We wanted it to move. Uh, one of those characters, he pops out of it at the end. And so we wanted it to be interactive. So ours is on the left. It was 3/4 inch, 1 inch PVC pipe, a square of that with two rails in the middle. And then it was covered with green vinyl and green clear vinyl. And we just cut a little thing in the top so he could come in and out. It was kind of fun just seeing this cube move around without any feet or anything.
How did the action work for the gelatinous cube eating the character?
Uh, if I don't remember.
I,
Oh, I think they went. I don't know. I don't remember. I'm sorry, but
yeah, no,
I know he pops out of it,
right.
but I don't know how he gets into it. So,
Yeah, it was fun as I had told you with our particular production, we had as you can see at least on the right, the designer Yelin had decided to go with this sort of translucent fabric, almost like a voile or a very heavy tulle. And all of the elements, such as the eyes, the nose, and the lips and whatnot, were all stuffed pieces of tulle to then give them the body. And this was hung on a mid-stage batten. And kind of going back to her design, you can't see it in its full glory here, but the design of the show was such that the false proscenium was the mouth of a monster, and you can see those swagged pieces overhead of the actors. Those were representative of the teeth. But then center stage, there was a raked platform that transitioned from the platform into a ground cloth and then spilled over the edge of the stage. And that was the tongue of the monster. So when the gelatinous cube flew in on that center stage batten, it would land right in front of that rake. And in the rake, you couldn't see it, was a trap door. And so there was a trick line that would pull open the mouth of the gelatinous cube from the stage floor, and the actor would then crawl into it by being pulled by their feet up and into this trap door, at which time we would then throw out a skeleton as if it's his skin and meat had been stripped off of him, and that was all that was remaining. So it was a very inspired choice, and I think it was, at least for our production, very successful. So,
you know what? Something we didn't talk about yet was the budgets.
Yes.
Do you remember how much your budget was for the props and puppets, or was it one
We
budget? Or
we had a separate budget for props, which, if I'm not mistaken, was $2,000, and that was just for props. And then I had, being that I'm the only professional in the shop at UCLA. I do have work study and I do have the occasional overhire, but I'm the only full-time person in the studio. So I told them, and this landed, I said, we need money. So we were able to have a gift of a very large budget, which was $8,000 shared between the costume monsters and the prop monsters, the puppet monsters. So of that, I think we were able to use about 5,000 of that for our materials. So, but we needed to be able to move and just make decisions as opposed to doing what we normally do, and that's finding things for pennies on the dollar. So I'm very grateful for our production budget on this one.
I know that our prop budget was 1,500. The puppet budget, I think, was between 1 and 2,000.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as much as yours, but
Well, and I should say, in full transparency, this was a very, very unrealistic expectation for every show. We actually operate on much smaller budgets at UCLA. So this was a gift, to have that much money. Normally, I only see about $3,000 for our largest operas and our musicals. So it made the process a little easier. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, the gelatinous cube was an interesting one to put together. So, and I think this is probably one of the more complicated ones, Vera. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your guys' Vera?
I'm sure, well, I hope a lot of people have seen this. This is pretty much our icon for the department. In fact, the eyeball part of the eyeball is what's in front of our door. So, if you found the eyeball, you found props. But this was based on this was what Bekah designed. And let's see, I think there's a picture. Yeah, right here. So the way during the summer, I cut all of these half round circles of 2-inch, insulation foam. And I made this really cool jig that goes on the bandsaw. So as the degree got, higher, the center point got closer to the blade. And good thing I kept it because we're using it now. But I made 2 halves, and before we put it together with fast bond contact cement, I measured the doorway of our prop shop, which was thinking ahead, 5'9". So the right above where the mouth ends, it's like 2/3 and then 1/3. And so we built it in 2 parts and put it in the truck in 2 parts and took it over and then put it together. That's what it's made out of. The other parts, if you go back to the main picture of both of them, yeah. So we were very happy with the eyelids. The top and bottom eyelids actually did open and close. The mouth moved up and down a bit. And when when Vera gets killed, she gets stabbed in the eye. And when she gets stabbed in the eyes closed. And then see the red tongue there? I bought a red yoga mat and we cut it to shape and rolled it back up into the puppet. And one of our students built a little, string thing. And then when it died, the tongue rolled out. And I thought it was wonderful, wonderful.
That's fabulous.
I love
So
what about yours? And
here's another question for you, because this ties into our approach. Was the armature that piece that you built sitting on, was somebody inside of that doing the operations?
No, you can see two Banraku puppeteers on either side.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, they just kind of hung out with it and moved it around. It was on a 6-inch PVC pipe that went onto
Mm,
a platform with wheels on it. And
right.
it was kind of we put some handles in the back and they just kind of moved it. They did other stuff throughout the show, so it was a given vocabulary.
And
Mhm.
so here's another question for you, because looking at this, what did you use on the surface? Because obviously when you're doing cutting and stacking foam, we always have those lines, those seam lines to deal
Yeah,
with.
which
So
you
what did
can
you
you
guys
can
put on
see
the
some
outside?
here. Well, one of my favorite sealers is carpenter's glue, and
Mm.
carpenter's glue with a little flour. And
Oh,
I started adding the flour because when I learned the fake food cake icing recipe of crystal gel and cake flour, and I was looking for something to seal, I forget what. I thought, try that, put something else in the carpenter's glue, and it'll make it harder. And so one of our students who uh, built this, she made the coating. I know it was carpenter's glue, and she put sawdust in it so that it had a texture to it.
right.
What
That's
about you?
fascinating.
Yeah.
Th
What about
those are the sort of little tips and tricks that we all love to share in our industry, because it's one of the things I always tell my students. I say, look, I have the best idea for the moment that's in my head, but I always give them the agency to speak up, because I learn almost as much from them as they do from me. So that's always fun to see what other people's ideas are, and how it improves our process. So that's cool.
so
I'll
what
have to
what
use
did
that
you
one.
make yours out of? And was there a
Um,
person in it or behind it or
Yeah, we had the director wanted as many of these monsters to be as autonomous as possible, and in that we also wanted to give as many performance or puppeteering opportunities as much as we could. So we ended up buying a lot of closed cell foam. Of L200 is what some people may know it as. It's also the same material that they use in cosplaying garage mats. So all of the same thing, but we bought it in big sheets. So about 4x8 sheets, I think was about what they were, and they ran at the time probably about $85 a sheet. They're quite a lot more these days. So what we did is we had, well, I should kind of circle back to the idea behind somebody wearing it, is that we had to make sure that it was hollow inside, and then also lightweight enough to be worn, but then also hold its structure. So that way it didn't require too much weight. Okay. So we had found a pattern, a flat pattern. Flat patterns, turning them into dimensional objects is one of my favorite things, especially when you have to scale something up. So we had a flat pattern for a sphere that came. If you can look, so you can see there's some seams in it, and they were basically these eye-shaped pieces that would then come together and glue edge to edge. We used 1/2 inch foam, and we used a contact adhesive to put them together, and then we built a pattern of fabric. So what you see on the outside was this sort of disco ball-esque sequined stretchy material
yeah.
that we then sewed into a giant sock. And the inner portion of the eye is actually the piece that we cut away and then flipped around,
I
right?
see. Mhm.
And so that's how we were able to get, without too much math is everything, right? It came together quite easily. And then we put on the inside a little bit of red felt and gave it some texture, because the piece that you don't see in here, and sadly I don't have an image to share with you, is that the eye of Vera, when she went out on stage, was a pink balloon that was about 30 inches in diameter, to kind of give you an idea of the scale of that piece. Overall, our piece was about 60 inches in diameter. And that pink balloon had an eyeball, like the iris and the pupil of a regular eye with a bunch of veins, that was hand painted onto it every single night. And that balloon was actually popped with the tip of Tilly's sword throughout the course of the performance. So we had an explosion
What paint
of the eyeball.
What paint did you use to paint a balloon, an inflated?
That was a bit of a misstatement there. We just used big fat Sharpies.
Okay.
So that was the quick and easiest way to do it. So, but and on the inside, to kind of like put it all together, is that we used a drumline harness that was then built into a PVC infrastructure that was built into the crown of Vera, and then hooked into the harness, so that way the person's body weight was nice and evenly distributed, and it was easy for them to wear it and walk around. Awesome. Unfortunately, based on the design, visibility when you're wearing something like that was always a consideration, and so we had cut a small sliver up, like right above the top of the eye cavity. There was a small sliver that was just about in their eye line, and they were able to look through that to see what was coming ahead of them. And then the opening at the bottom, because it came down over their head, they would look down and see where they were. So it was definitely a complicated situation for them, given that we had to go very low tech with the construction. But making sure that they felt comfortable, safe, that the weight was evenly distributed on their body, that was all key to giving a good performance. Sure. So this was probably one of the more challenging pieces, even though technically speaking, it wasn't really that hard to do. So, because there's just a lot of marks to hit with Vera.
So the next couple slides, they're all you. We had kobolds; those were costume designs, and unfortunately, I just wasn't able to grab those. But why don't you tell us about how you did these?
Yeah, the kobolds, again, it was sort of a hybrid of Timon puppet, the Timon puppet from The Lion King, and a little bit of Bunraku style, much like you had with your Vera. And so the design of these themselves, some of you may or may not recognize them, was a little reminiscent of the critters from Real Monsters, which is a very popular cartoon. And again, our designer Yilin was pulling a lot on her childhood to kind of bring these to the stage. And so we went through a process of building armatures out of dowels and then attaching those dowels at the joints with nylon webbing, right? So we had about a 1-inch nylon webbing. And that way those dowels could then be embedded into the foam pieces that we cut out on a bandsaw. That was about a 4-pound upholstery foam that we had purchased big blocks of. And so it was all sort of, this is also another thing that I should talk about. And Yilin, it was amazing to see how she grew, because she did a few more shows before she graduated from the program where she did puppet design. But drawings for puppets, right, is another whole skill set, right? Drawing scenery is one thing, but then drawing something that is dimensional and organic and giving the elevations of the front and the sides and the top down and scale references is a challenge for somebody who's never done it. But it was really, really amazing to watch her grow as she figured out how to present those designs and concepts to the shops.
Also, the drawing that's really important is the relationship of the puppeteer to it.
Correct. Yes, yes. And so, and again, we worked a lot. She was in the shop very, very often, even though it wasn't necessarily a function of her assignment as the designer for this show, but she wanted to be a big part of the process. So yeah, in that, the head of this puppet, again, was something some of you may or may not be familiar. There's a really wonderful website for those of you who might be interested in getting into puppeteering and puppet building. It's oh gosh, and then it just flew right out of my head. Jay, help me here.
A website. Not sure.
Yeah, what was the
Lots of websites.
website? Oh my gosh. It's oh my goodness. Hold on a second.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I gotta find this
Nikki
because
says
it's
puppet nerd. Nikki says puppet.
no,
No.
it's I've got it right here. It is
Okay.
Project Puppet. There we go. See, it only
Oh,
took
yeah,
me
yeah.
10 seconds.
Sounds about that.
Projectpuppet.com. They have some wonderful patterns. And what I had done again is took the pattern for one of the puppets that I had bought many years ago, and I had blown it up and printed it out on a plotter to get the head, because the head shape that Yulin had designed was in that world. And I was like, okay, well, as prop folks, we look at the world a little bit differently and we try to figure out how we can make things work. So I took this little 8-inch puppet head and I blew it up into this thing that was almost 28 inches in diameter. And I prototyped it, and I was very, very pleased with how well it worked. And doing it in the 1/2-inch L200 foam didn't give it too much weight or awkwardness. And it allowed us to really build this in a very similar way that you would on a small sock puppet. So then was the challenge of skinning these, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't necessarily have a pattern for the bodies. The bodies were something that we were deriving through trial and error based on her sketches. And so over time, we figured out, how to do this, and we got rough shapes, and then we hand stitched all of these pieces onto the respective body parts. There was a slight adjustment that we learned we had to do, is the necks needed to be a lot more flexible and have a lot more mobility. And so ultimately what we ended up doing was anchoring a rope into the torso, and then that rope went up and then connected into another piece of foam at the base of the head where the neck meets. So that way they had this sort of weird ET-like telescoping neck when they needed to. And then we added, you can see here, before we painted them out, these were white elastic bands at their feet that flipped over the shoes of the puppeteers. And then inside, we had electronics built into their eyes. Their eyes were back painted 6-inch Christmas ornaments that you can buy and fill yourself. That's how we made the eyes for these guys. But the actors then were able, or the operators rather, were able to reach inside and flip a switch and turn the eyes on and off as they needed to. But these were definitely the darlings of the stage when they came out, and people were really quite endeared to them. So it was fun to put those together, even though it was very complicated.
How big is the theater that your show was presented in?
I'm always bad at remembering capacity.
How many
It's
seats?
called the Little Theater, but I believe it's just under 300 seats. It's actually our smaller of our two proscenium spaces.
Ours is 380 seats.
Yeah,
Little.
it's a good size theater for educational productions, is what I can say, because it's big enough to feel like they're being challenged, but not too big to feel overwhelming. So that's why
ours is too big.
if any of you came to UCLA and saw the Fruit Playhouse, you'd know what a big stage is. So Jay,
yeah,
talk to us.
So the next puppet scenic element, whatever you want to call it, we're going to talk about is the Tiamat, the 5-headed dragon. And our directors had a little bit of a different concept for this. We did have 5 dragon heads, as you can see here. And you can see in the third picture, the one with all the horns on them. So that's the scale. But our director really took to heart the narrator's words in the opening of the show, when the narrator explains that the family died in a car crash. And I actually have the script here. I'm just going to read it to everybody. So Agnes says, "I wish my life was less boring." Narrator says, "And so the gods answered her wish by smiting down every single one of her loved ones in a single car crash." But this isn't the story of that tragedy. Okay. So the directors really decided that The dragon, the thing that she fights to uh, cathartically to grow and put it in its place is the car. It's not this fantasy creature with five heads. It's the car. So uh, so Bekah designed a car puppet. That's what we called. And I made a rehearsal puppet. So during the summer, when people were around, we rehearsed and refined things, how things were put together. The point was that she fought the car, and the car was trying to kill her at the same time. Who was going to win? And when you look at a car, there are you can see down here the front wheel wells. Well, they're actually shaped like claws of a dragon, and the windshield and the hood are shaped like uh, armor shields and whatnot, things that you can press against and push people this way and that way and whatnot. So at the end, the dragon heads come down, they light up, smoke comes out, all that stuff. And you can see a lot of the shapes right here. They were made out of, we went really old school and cheap because we do 10 performances. So they just have to last, 3 weeks. Uh, foam core and PVC. Basically, that was it. PVC pipe as the handles of whatnot. And the choreographer, Michelle Dunleavy, did a great job of using all of these really interesting shapes to push her around the stage, to try to cut her in half, to try to smash her down, whatnot. And I thought it was fantastic because they just went a layer deeper.
Mhm.
Um, so that was exciting for us to make, rehearsal puppet, then refine it into the show puppet, and work with the the actors on, the safest way to use them. I mean, that claw, that could really hurt because it's just a piece of foam core going like that. So we worked with them and the choreographer and the director. What's nice about when we have puppets and stuff, we get right up on stage, with them and teach them and work with them to, make it their own and whatnot. We're very much involved in that. So that's what I wanted to talk about the way we approached it.
Yeah.
Um, how did you?
It's fascinating. And actually, I have a bit of a challenging question for you that some people may be wondering. You say you only had 10 performances, and so you were able to use lower cost, lighter weight materials. Had you ever thought about what you would need to do if it needed a longer duty cycle for that particular piece? What materials you might have chosen?
Uh, well, I hadn't thought of it then because that's all I'm thinking about is getting that thing on stage. But
It's
if
kind of
I
an
were
unfair
doing,
question in the moment, but I'm sitting here wondering myself.
no, my gut reaction is some Sintra,
Mm-hmm.
flat PVC,
Right.
vacuum formable stuff.
Yeah.
And I would imagine some of it would be vacuum formed, such as the windshield could have a three-dimensional pop to it, kind of come out.
Right.
Maybe parts of the fenders and the wheel wells could have a design to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my gut instinct, probably with, uh, some kind of handles behind and whatnot. And that would
Right.
last a long, long time. I don't think we'd want to get involved with carbon fibering
Right. Right.
foam
And
core or Luan or something. That
and
seems a little overbuilt, but
and perhaps maybe something more user friendly for people who one don't have access to a whole lot of tools and toys, much like we do, either in regional theater or at universities. Maybe it could even be something like using the garage mats. Again, I always try to think about what
Yeah.
we can use. So doing it dimensionally out of foam and then giving us some sort of a hard shell with Warbler,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Warbler is that
Yeah.
very friendly. It's not the cheapest thing, but again, it's one of those entry level, very user friendly thermoplastics that people who may not have a whole lot of experience can experiment with and maybe find some success.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
no, it's beautiful execution on your guys' part for this piece.
I wanted to add when you were talking about materials, when choosing materials, we we build what we know.
Right.
So I'm, it's funny, a lot in my job, I think I did this when I was their age. So I did the same thing. I mean, the same materials.
Right.
Obviously, I've learned more in the interim, but we kind of like an actor, they have their tricks and they go to those
Hmm.
safe tricks that gets them through. And I think builders, often do the same thing, not always, but
Right.
often. So tell us about your Tiamat.
Yeah, so we went more in the literal sense. And so we had to figure out how to fabricate five of these dragon heads. And the order was tall because the director wanted them to have tricks such as lighting and smoke and all kinds of other things. And it became very evident as we went through the process of prototyping that there was going to have to be some things that they got and some things that they didn't. So again, going back to utilizing a flat pattern, if you can see here, there's some seams and whatnot. So this was a multi-part pattern that we had to come together into this dimensional shape. And again, this was a smaller pattern that we then blew up on a plotter and printed out these larger pattern pieces and then transferred them over to the L200 foam and then cut them out.
Mhm.
We would use a Dremel with a fine sanding wheel to kind of smooth out these seams. And then anywhere where it was a little bit of a larger liability, because we were going to have to paint these, is we used foam clay, which is one of my all-time favorite products over the last 5-7 years. Foam clay is just one of the gifts from above that allows us to do a lot of things for not a lot of money. You can buy, I think it's a 3-pound bag or something, or a 5-pound bag for about $30, and quite a little goes quite a long way. So we used that to kind of clean up the seams. This was our initial prototype, and you can sort of see the flat spots that were the places where the horns were going to land, because we needed eventually to have them all have their own versions of horns. So we added different textures with hand cut pieces of foam that were 1/8 inch thick, and they were all designed in the idea that they were parts of the elements, right? So we had earth and wind and fire and water, and then we had electricity, or lightning rather, and their colors were all respective to kind of those different elements around in the show. And as I said, there was a little bit of a give and take based on what they were going to be able to do, because the director really wanted these to be able to be menacing and have a lot of motion and scale. And so figuring out how we were going to do that was a bit of a challenge. Initially, the designer had asked us, Yilin wanted these like the playground, the collapsible play tubes that you see like in kindergartens where kids can climb through them and whatnot. You can sort of do those. And we bought them. I still have them. But when we got them, we realized they were going to be far too heavy for the operators to manipulate. So ultimately, we switched over to a fabric neck for them. And to get the scale, we bought a bunch of film industry boom poles that are normally used for microphones on film sets. And that allowed us to do a couple of different things. One, give scale to different ones based on where they were on stage, but also adjust the height and therefore how the weight affected the body of the operator based on, one, the physical ability and also the stature of the operator as well. So having those boom poles was kind of one of those strokes of genius, because we really weren't sure we were going to be able to go with a single size, because it wasn't a one size fits all application.
Yeah.
Inside the head, because we sort of abandoned the notion of all the special effects and in favor of articulation. So inside these heads, they were hollow. And my associate at the time and I came up with this idea to create sort of a gimbal mechanism. So if anybody's familiar with lock line, right, which is that sort of flexible tube, it was sort of in that same vein, but we had got these plastic shells that were slightly larger than croquet balls. I had an abundance of croquet balls, these wooden balls, and we had sanded one side flat about 2 inches across, and we had put a 3/8 inch threaded set into the actual wooden ball, which then was able to mechanically attach to the end of the boom pole, giving us a really solid mechanical connection. And then what we did around that orb, that shell inside the head, is we used expanding foam. And so that expanding foam did two things. One, it locked the orb where we needed it at the base of the neck, so that way we could have that articulation. But then it also gave body and structure to the rest of the dragon's head, so that way they were a lot more robust than they were as just a hollow shell.
Awesome.
And we built these twice, I should say, because we had to build a full rehearsal set, and then we also had to build the show set.
Yeah.
And the horns, I would also like to point out, those were all yeah, go ahead.
But they're just at the end of the show. So
they are. Yeah.
Why not just give them the ones you're building to rehearsal for 2 days or whatever rehearsal for that scene is, and then get them back? Seems like a lot of work.
If we were dealing with professional puppeteers, we may have gotten away with that, but we were dealing with student performers who had entered our program as actors and then had been cast as puppeteers.
True.
So the learning curve for them as an operator was such that we had to provide them with something that was one-to-one as soon as possible to get them really comfortable and allow them to build up a muscle memory and the muscle stature that they were going to need to do the performance, right? So it was one of those things that we discussed, and that's why we had the budget, right?
Yeah.
So, and there you can kind of see them in play right there.
This is cute.
But yeah, it was a lot of work. And I would say, what was your production timeline, Jay? Because I know we had, I started prototyping before we started the school year. But ultimately, when we had all boots on the ground, we had maybe 6 weeks to get into tech.
Well, I know that I cut those circles in the summer, and I think this was the second show of the semester. I don't know. I don't really start when other departments start. I start way, way before if I can.
Right.
Because like you, I'm the only person in the shop besides the students. And this is the show that kind of broke me and taught me a lot about working at the university, because the next show we did was Angels in America. And then the next show we were going to do was Spam-A-Lot, but the pandemic happened. So just to say those three shows in the same stretch is tiring. But anyway, we're kind of coming up on time, I think. Tell us about the purple things, and then we'll get to
Just real quickly, we'll touch on this because, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that the puppet and the monster concept, there's some that are narratively important, but then there are others where the designers can have some free reign. And this was one of those other critters that our designer Yelin came up with, and it was quite honestly her favorite. She still, when I run into her, she asks me if I still have it, and I do. I keep it because it's basically a giant stuffed animal with a puppet head. But that was a fun one. She called it Smurple. And Jay, we did a painted drop for our map. What was the way that you guys attacked that?
So in the script, it calls for a comically large map. And what we did was we got a photo screen, a light diffuser. I actually put here what we used. And the cool thing is that it rolls up, it twists into itself. So one of the actors had it rolled up in his hand or, under his arm or whatever. And then someone says, can show us the map. And it just appears from nothing. And got a good laugh. And one of our students painted that. So
I love it.
That was fun.
That is a shining example of using something for what it was not intended.
Yeah.
And a key. Yeah.
I just want to point out in the right below the map is a cardboard box, Tilly's Toys for donation. One of my favorite things is to, sounds crazy, is to build cardboard boxes that aren't cardboard boxes, boxes that have a plywood box inside. and that
Right.
up. And in this particular light box, there was a light, and at the end of the fight, she plunges her sword into that in a big light. But anyway, we've got lots of
That's
boxes
brilliant.
that
That's
look like
brilliant.
cardboard boxes, but you can stand on them. So
We do a lot of things like that. Paint wood to look like wood.
yeah,
So, but weaponry is another key component of this
yeah,
show, as it does deal with the Dungeons and Dragons lore. So why don't you talk us through what you guys'
sure.
your approach was?
So our approach was I worked with our fight choreographer, Eric Johnson, and we always work together. We always go over what we each think the weapon should be and who has the best source and whatnot. And it was decided pretty early on that they weren't going to be metal.
Hmm,
There wasn't going to be a lot of contact. Our
right.
stage was very big, and through working on a lot of shows with weapons, I've really learned that it's a lot is in the setup,
Hmm,
uh, and that if you can sell the setup, then what comes after that, the audience kind of can put it together. You don't need a lot of, I mean, yes, I know in Shakespeare festivals for sure. Yes, you're going to do all that. In this show, we just didn't need to do a lot of contact. So they were quite far away from each other. I think there was once or twice where someone was holding up something like this, and then it was
hmm.
hit with a sword this way or an axe. But we got these nylon polymer swords from Cold Steel. They're really affordable.
Yeah,
This is from the current website, so this is $40. And I think I put the picture of two other designs, two
yeah.
other. We have these little daggers. They're really great. We use them all the time. And so they come black, but and I'm not a fan of rub and buff, uh, but for this, it really worked. It's
Right,
that waxy kind of, but it kind of got into the pores, so to speak, of the
right, right.
of the plastic here. And so we did it for rehearsal, and then before opening night, I went and kind of added a little more, give them a little love, and then once during the second week. But I really liked these, and I liked the way we approached it.
Yeah, it's
What did you?
fabulous. We actually went with authentic combat weapons. These were fight grade weapons that we rented from Preferred Arms,
Nice.
which has over the years become one of my go-to places. I know that I'm in LA and I have a lot of resources at my disposal, but the red tape that is not required to get from Rob at Preferred Arms is much appreciated. So, yeah, we used all of their weapons, and in this is their collection of She Kills Monsters weaponry that they have on offer. And
Mhm.
you can call them up, and I think for the entire run of show plus rehearsals was, and again, don't quote me on this because I don't want to sell them short, but I think it was only about $500 or $600 for the entire collection of weapons to rent for the run. And renting weapons is a great way to ensure that one, you're getting quality from a reputable dealer, but two, that they're also maintained well,
For sure.
right?
For sure.
So safety is always a consideration. There was very light, next to no contact for this particular production. But all the same, we wanted something that felt menacing, that felt real, that had weight, as those elements do help in performance with the actors. So
Yes.
yeah, it was great to be able to do sort of, quote unquote, the real thing for them on stage, but also keeping them safe. In an educational setting, I always try to give them as many experiences as we possibly can. So,
Sure.
but yeah,
Well, I think that uh, came in right at 1 hour. I think that finishes our presentation. But are there any questions or things you want to talk about? Anybody?
Looks like Patrick had a question about for Jay about do you feel that the audience could follow the connection to the car crash?
I don't know. I did go to see the show. Um, I I don't know. Honestly, it is spoken in the 90 minutes before. So who's going to really remember that? But I do know that it's a topic of discussion after. What was that all about? What's that card? But maybe upon reflection, maybe with, how you talk about the show with your family or friends after. So I can't give you a straight answer, but yes and no. How was that? You know, I don't know. What else?
I think we kind of talked a little bit about what the lead time was from designs to rehearsals to opening night. Can you just sort of talk through that one more time for us real quick?
Sure. Our process is that we've got about a 6, 7 week design period. And halfway through that period, we've instituted a check-in. So the designer isn't kind of going like this when we need them to go like this. Um, there's a can't always stick to that because this was in the fall, so we have those designed before we leave in the spring and the winter, spring. Uh, that's what we're doing now. We're working on Crazy for You and Rhinoceros right now, but those are in October and November. And I'm gonna, during the summer, be working on the bigger stuff on them. So, but if it's a show within the school year, it's about 6 weeks of design and about 5 weeks of build officially. Sometimes it's 8 for me.
Yeah.
Uh, as I said, I try to get going as soon as possible. Kevin?
Yeah, very much similar. So especially it's always a challenge for us in the fall shows because we start the process in the spring quarter or the second semester of the year for some folks. And having designs over the summer in an educational setting is a little challenging because a lot of our grad students who are design base are traveling to various events around the world, out of the country. But yeah, it was about the same. So about a 6 to 10 weeks of design process because it starts the quarter before, and then once we actually get into the shops from the time that we start the program until we get into tech, it's about 6, 7 weeks.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in. Thank you, Kevin and Jay, so much for your presentation for us. And then I'm going to thank everybody else for attending this evening. I hope it was fun and informative for everyone. Get your Sharpies ready to mark your calendars for our upcoming Spaminars. On March 16th, we'll have SPM member Freed talking with us about SEO, search engine optimization for your portfolio website. She'll show us how to divide up our content, find and use keywords to write copy that speaks to the clients that you want, add schema and metadata to make sure that search engines know what audience you're interested in attracting. And then on April 27th, we'll be diving into our favorite things and talking about our favorite cutting devices used in prop shops with Jen McClure. On May 18th, our May 18th, June 22nd, and July 20th Spaminars are in the works, and topics will be announced for those soon. If you're interested in joining SPM and are a working prop manager in a nonprofit theater, opera company, or children's theater, or are an educator who teaches prop classes, please visit our website or click the link in the chat to fill out our membership form. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are in the chat. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Prop Managers with special thanks to SPM members Patrick Drone, Freed, Ben Hellman, Nikki Kulas, Jen McClure, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, Karen Robbie Vance, and Helen Stratakes. Thanks again for attending Prop On, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.